most, it runs in their blood at a young age, a desire to help and heal. For Gary Metz, it was no different.
I was a good fit, and I never left.
Gary started as a firefighter cadet in Littleton in 1976, and he served for nearly 30 years, being promoted to lieutenant and eventually captain.
I was at a busy station. I liked it, but it might not have been a bad idea to get rotated out to a slower station.
After he retired in 2004, those around him started to realize he just wasn't himself.
And that was gradual. My boys had come up to my wife and said at one point they'd like their old dad back. And
Gary wasn't sleeping. He thought about suicide and started isolating himself.
Little stresses would set me off. I had a lot of anger, wanting to harm myself. That was the bottom. And having those thoughts in my head, which is so unlike, what I used to be.
For Gary, it wasn't one call that triggered him, but rather the calls over his career. But we're learning PTSD doesn't always present the same in all firefighters.
Where are we venting? We're gonna vent right here.
Juan Vigil is a lieutenant with Denver Fire. He also trains recruits.
Before you even touch that, you're gonna go on air.
Juan's PTSD stemmed from a single call, one that happened years before, but didn't surface until recently.
We walked into an establishment just to do a fire inspection that we do annually.
Juan had a flashback from a call in 2012.
It was a homicide, multiple deaths, and it was something that wasn't, I don't know if we ever dealt with it, but this kind of brought me back to this situation, and I can actually smell the blood on me. That's how bad it is.
Juan's PTSD from a call years before came to surface. He became more irritable. His sleep got worse.
It gets to the point where you start reflecting upon yourself and you don't recognize the individual that you're looking at in the mirror like, why did that trigger this situation? But yet here I am. I'm either really mad about a situation, I'm really short with my spouse, which, she's my rock. So, sorry.
And for some firefighters, it's one call, one experience that puts them quickly into a spiral.
And he said it was amazing, the collapse of the buildings, how far down into the earth they went when they collapsed.
Melinda Ryan's husband, Steve, was sent to ground zero just weeks after 9/11.
And so one of the things that he said to me was, I'm going out to New York. I'll be out there for probably 2 weeks to help rescue. And I go, rescue? I don't know that you're going to be rescuing anybody at this point. I think you're going to be recovering. He goes, no, I'll be rescuing people.
Steve didn't rescue anyone. When he returned home, things were different.
So I think he had a hard time dealing with moving on, reconciling what happened, and asking for help, because he didn't, and he wouldn't. And anytime you asked him to talk about those kinds of things, he would get angry and upset about that.
Melinda knew Steve was in a dark place. He was short-tempered, he'd barely sleep, and he lost his love for the fire service.
He would go through spans where he wouldn't even go to work. He didn't even want to go to work. He didn't want to get up, he didn't want to go, and it didn't matter.
They tried sleep meds, antidepressants, therapists.
You couldn't reach him.
None of it worked.
I get home from work, it's probably a little after 5, and he's nowhere to be found. So now it's coming up on 9 p.m. and I'm mad because I don't know where he is. I haven't heard from him. I don't know what's going on. So I go into the garage to look for his golf clubs, and that's when I found him. He had shot himself here, and he'd been laying out there for I don't know how long. Don't know why, no note, no nothing.
Melinda is now telling Steve's story because there are too many stories just like Steve's. In 2017, 103 firefighters in the U.S. took their own lives. It's a silent struggle that's finally coming to the surface. It's been nearly 20 years since the worst call of his career.
So we got to call a Columbine, so I was like 2 minutes away.
While retired Littleton Battalion Chief Ray Ronnie Saw on April 20th, 1999, will never leave him.
So I was one of the first ones on the scene, the first one on the scene.
He, just like all the first responders that day, saw awful things, with images from the school shooting stuck in his head long after his shift ended. Eventually, he sought out therapy, fighting back fears of what his fellow firefighters might think.
But we all go through that stigma. Am I going to be accepted when I come back? Will I get fired? Will I get promoted? All those type of things. And I went through all that.
After managing his own PTSD, Ray made it his mission to change the attitudes many firefighters have towards mental health treatment.
And we're breaking that stigma. And the stigma is that, firefighters are big tough guys and we're there to help, but we don't know how to ask for help.
The courageous firefighter is the one who reaches out for help.
Captain Greg Pixley is the peer support director for Denver Fire.
The National Fallen Firefighters did a study in 2014. We are 3 times as likely to see a firefighter suicide in the firehouse than a firefighter line of duty death.
He knows firsthand what happens when someone doesn't get help.
So for me personally, having lost those to suicide, including my wife, I want to do whatever I can to provide anything that is available for those so that they don't find that they are alone.
He's now teaching firefighters in Denver and across the country how to identify the signs of PTSD and make seeking treatment as accepted as going to the hospital for a broken bone.
And if we don't educate ourselves, if we don't know what to do with those emotions from what we saw the night before or a week before or a year before, then we can find ourselves in some dangerous situations for the firefighter. Our suicide rates are higher than the general public. Our alcoholism rates are higher than the general public.
This is a crisis that we have in the fire service.
It's an emergency firefighters aren't used to dealing with, one that's even been frowned upon in the past, but is now getting a new look in hopes of saving more lives.
Some things definitely have to be talked about, and this is one of them.
It's a tough conversation.
I honestly didn't know anybody on the fire department before I left that was in any type of counseling or therapy.
And if they don't talk about it,
I've lost a number of friends. I've lost a number of colleagues.
we've seen silence can be deadly.
That breaks my heart that he didn't realize how important he was to other people.
It is a big issue.
Dr. Karen Jackson is a clinical psychologist for Denver Fire. She's spent thousands of hours with firefighters struggling with PTSD and depression.
Really, the things that they see are just horrendous. People don't have much of an idea about what it's really like.
She says this type of PTSD is unlike others.
Just because of the severity of it and because of the repetitive exposure. So this type of PTSD would be more like a person who experienced chronic abuse as a child.
Trouble sleeping, anxiety, excessive drinking, detachment, all routine signs a firefighter may need help.
I was in really bad shape, and it was recognized by some friends and one on the fire department. And he sat down with me and said, Gary, you're just not right.
Gary Metz knew his PTSD from 30 years in the fire service was beyond what he could control.
Within a week, I was there.
He flew to Washington, D.C. to the International Association of Firefighters Center of Excellence. It's an inpatient, comprehensive therapy program just for firefighters, created just 2 years ago out of an abundance of need. And in that time, they've had 472 firefighters come through.
It wasn't courageous to continue doing what I was doing. It was more courageous to take the step, maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, and go to get help.
Gary was there for 33 days and knows it most likely saved his life.
I don't think I would have lived much longer.
We know PTSD can take a toll on even the toughest firefighter. Local heroes who've had a hard time admitting they too may need rescuing.
Suicide is horrible for the people that are left behind. It's never the answer.